Good morning, boys and girls, and welcome again to Reading with Mrs. Gordon. As we commemorate Black History Month, and knowing that Black History Month is almost over, I decided to leave this book right here to be our last book in the series of Reading with Goodnight Lounge. The title of the book is A Picture Book of Martin Luther King Jr. by David A. Adler and illustrated by Robert Casilla. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of America's greatest leaders, and he dreamed of us living in a world that was free of violence and hatred and prejudice. He believed in equality for all people, boys and girls. So let's read and let's learn a lot about Dr. King and what he stood for. I hope you enjoy this reading. Martin Luther King Jr. was one of America's great leaders. He was a powerful speaker and he spoke out against laws which kept Black people out of many schools and jobs. He led protests and marches demanding fair laws for all people. Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January the 15th, 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. Martin's father was a pastor. His mother had been a teacher. Martin had an older sister, Willie Christine, and a younger brother, Alfred Daniel. Young Martin liked to play baseball, football, and basketball. He liked to ride his bicycle and to sing. He often sang in his father's church. Notice Martin is in the center with his brother Alfred Daniel left and his sister Willie Christine on the right. Young Martin played in his backyard with his friends. One day he was told that two of his friends would no longer play with him because they were white and he was Black. Martin cried. He didn't understand why the color of his skin should matter to anyone. Martin's mother told him that many years ago, Black people were brought in chains to America and sold as slaves. She told him that long before Martin was born, the slaves had been set free. However, there were still some people who did not treat Black people fairly. In Atlanta, where Martin lived, and elsewhere in the United States, there were whites only signs. Black people were not allowed in some parks or pools or hotels, restaurants, and even schools. Blacks were kept out of many jobs. Martin learned to read at home before he was old enough to start school. All through his childhood, he read books about Black leaders. Martin was a good student. He finished high school 2 years early and was just 15 when he entered Morehouse College in Atlanta. At college, Martin decided to become a minister. Do you know what a minister is, boys and girls? A minister is another name for a preacher. After Martin was graduated from Morehouse, he studied for a doctorate at Boston University. That's how he get to Dr. Martin Luther King from the doctorate degree. While he was there, he met Coretta Scott. She was studying music. They fell in love and married. In 1954, Martin Luther King Jr. began his first job as a pastor in Montgomery, Alabama. The next year, Rosa Parks, a Black woman, was arrested in Montgomery. She had been sitting just behind the white-only section on the bus when all the seats in the section were taken. The driver told her to get up so a white man could have her seat. Rosa Parks refused. Refuse means to not give in to the demand of what somebody wants you to do. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a protest. Blacks throughout the city refused to ride the buses. Dr. King said, "There comes a time when people get tired of being kicked around." One night while Dr. King was at a meeting, someone threw a bomb into his house. Martin's followers were angry. They wanted to fight. But Martin told them to go home peacefully. "We must love our white brothers," he said. "We must meet hate with love." The bus protest lasted almost a year. When it ended, there were no more white-only sections on the bus. Dr. King decided to move back to Atlanta in 1960. There, he continued to lead peaceful protests against white-only waiting rooms, lunch counters, and restrooms. He led many marches for freedom. In 1963, Dr. King led the biggest march of all, the March on Washington. More than 200,000 Black and white people followed him. "I have a dream," he said in his speech. "I have a dream that my 4 children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." The next year in 1964, Dr. King was awarded one of the greatest honors any person can win, the Nobel Peace Prize. The country was changing. New laws were passed. Blacks could go to the same schools as whites. They could go to the same stores, restaurants, and hotels. White-only signs were against the law. Dr. King told his followers to protest peacefully, but there were some riots and some violence. Then, in April 1968, Dr. King went to Memphis, Tennessee. He planned to march so Black and white garbage workers would get the same pay for the same work. On April 4th in Memphis, Dr. King stood outside his motel room. Another man, James Earl Ray, was hiding nearby. He pointed a rifle at Dr. King. He fired the gun. An hour later, Dr. King was dead. Martin Luther King Jr. dreamed of a world free of hate, prejudice, and violence. Carved on the stone which marks his grave are the words, "I'm free at last." The end. Boys and girls, I hope you enjoyed this last book of the series, commemorating once again Black History Month. As always, don't forget to take the AR test at the end of this book. Until next time, bye-bye.